Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Pre-Thought Hour, the show where I say we because it's my co-host and I, and she's just arrived by the skin of her teeth. Here she is, Tercia. How the devil are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I made it literally by the skin of my teeth just in time. We had house guests over and they just leaving, so I made it. I'm here, and I'm here.
Oh no.
I'm here.
Good. Welcome. Okay. And meet our guest tonight, Benjamin Creevy. How the
Hello.
devil are you?
I'm pretty good, thank you. Yeah, not bad at all.
Good. That's what we like to hear. Yeah. So I've already had a chat with Ben earlier in the week, like I do, because I like to check out my guests and make sure that they're suitable for our show, Tertia. So I know a bit about Ben that you don't. So I can tell you that he's a weird plant grower. He likes to grow exotic plants, usually from tropical jungles. And sometimes you can see his products of this enterprise on eBay, where you might be able to buy some of his exotic plants. And he also rescues birds from the local pet shop. So I've told him that he's got to strangle them for tonight because we don't want them going cheap in the middle of our show. So he's put them in some other place. And also the most interesting thing about him, I think, is that he was raised in the JWs as an OEC, an old Earth creationist. So we want him to tell us the story, don't we? How did that happen? What was it like? Yeah.
Well, I would just like to ask before we get to the really interesting stuff. Do these exotic plants of yours, do they include anything like the Venus flytrap? And what exactly does exotic plants entail in your neck of the woods? And then have you ever been to South Africa? And are you familiar with the fynbos biome? And would that be seen as exotic? And would so just quickly to
Okay. Well, a lot of the plants, I grow all sorts of plants. Pretty much I've dabbled in a little bit of everything. I don't currently grow any carnivorous plants, which would be like your Venus flytraps and pitcher plants and nepenthes and things like that. That's a whole other world that you can get lost in. Most of the plants I grow at the moment are Southeast Asian and South American sort of tropical rainforest type plants. Some of them quite rare, some of them not even yet described by science and given a classification. They do creep in now and again. My particular passion is a family of plants called Gersonariads, which are the African violet family, but they're actually found all over the world in tropical climes, and they're an extremely diverse group. The family contains everything from trees and shrubs to sort of rhizomes and herbaceous perennials and annuals. So it's a really interesting group of plants.
Well, I do hope that you are more hardy than the plants you breed, because I'm not good at keeping plants alive in general. But the one plant that I've never succeeded at keeping alive is an African violet. So I do hope that that you are more hardy than.
You want one of these? See these glass domes?
Yes.
Try growing them in one of those because they like very high humidity, and so I grow most of mine in under glass domes.
I will try that. It looks beautiful. But about the JW aspect and the plants, if I'm not mistaken, as far as I know, Jehovah's Witnesses aren't encouraged to study or have careers As far as I understand, you basically you finish school and then your almost full-time job is to walk door to door and win souls. And I'm speaking under correction here, but could you enlighten me as to that, Benjamin?
Yeah, sure. Basically, the sort of policy, if you like, the Jehovah's Witness policy is that sort of academic pursuits and careers are not are kind of frowned upon. They're not encouraged. Basically, you know, to be considered a sort of faithful and good young Jehovah's Witness, your entire emphasis should be on sort of furthering God's kingdom on earth. So sort of rising through the ranks of the church if you're a man, or if you're a woman, sort of becoming what they call a pioneer, which is someone that engages in full-time preaching work. So I sort of came to a bit of a crossroads in my life in secondary school, where I was kind of being pulled. I was quite an artistic student, very good at sculpting, so I was being pulled in that direction, sort of to pursue the arts. And then my biology teacher thought that I'd make a good biologist, and he was pulling me in that direction. And then the Jehovah's Witnesses wanted me to just finish school as quickly as possible, get the basic level of education legally required, and then get straight into being a full-time sort of preacher, if you like. So I was considered quite.
They didn't want you. They didn't want you contaminated with that nasty science stuff, did they?
No, they didn't want me finding out too much. But it was already too late by that stage. A secondary school. Sorry.
It seems that the biology teacher won the contest in the end, at least.
Kind of. I compromised and I went on to study horticulture at university, because I could kind of get away with that, because although it is science based and there's quite a lot of science and entomology and botany in it, it's kind of,
they probably thought it was just gardening.
Yeah, I could get away with calling it vocational qualification. So I could get away with doing that. It wasn't too bad.
Yeah. But also, I can see. I mean, the first gardener was Adam, so I can sort of see horticulture and working with plants and that fitting into the sort of acceptable sphere of knowledge.
Sure, yeah.
But something that's
too academic.
well, to the uninitiated, it's not too academic. But something that when you said that JWs have to focus on the men advancing through the levels of the church and women being pioneers, that's a very biblical idea. Just to put that out there, that is. The idea of pursuing careers and making money it's actually, in my opinion, as I read the scriptures these days, it's a very unscriptural idea. I mean, Jesus preached that we should sell everything we own and we shouldn't gather anything on earth because moth and robbers and rust will destroy it. So the JWs are onto something in terms of biblical scripture, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, they are on the face of it, but there is a fair amount of hypocrisy. I mean, there are quite a few Jehovah's Witnesses who sort of got quite good educations and good careers before they joined and sort of became quite affluent. And then that's okay. Or you'll get the odd eldest son that will go to university and do something academic, and a blind eye is sort of turned, you know. They've got their fair share of hypocrisy as well. Like
I'm interested to know how it started, because the Mormons, of course, they had Joseph Smith, didn't they? And Was there a sort of JW equivalent? How did it branch off from the Christians?
Well, there was a kind of sort of in the sort of late 19th century, there was a kind of a crucible of charismatic Christianity going on in America, and the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses was a chap called Charles Taze Russell, and he was sort of looking, you know, he sort of wanted to find a more pure form of Christianity, something more akin to what was practiced by the first century Christians that was sort of closer to Christ. But he associated with a lot of Seventh-day Adventists and, you know, moved in those circles. And it's amazing how many modern Christian cults have their origin sort of back then in you know, with what was going on in North America at the time. So Charles Taze Russell founded an organization, I think, called the International Bible Students, and they were the prototype Jehovah's Witnesses. They didn't take on that name until much later on.
So how did the name come about then?
It's a biblical passage. There's a passage in the Bible that says, "You are my witnesses," and the Jehovah's Witnesses pretty early on wanted to restore use of God's name, you know, the Tetragrammaton in ancient Hebrew, which was Oh, can you hear me? Everything okay?
We had a crash then, I think. Did you? I think you're back. Yes.
Am I back? Yep. Where did we get to?
To the tetragram name.
Oh right, yeah, the Tetragrammaton. You know, the sort of name of God, which in Judaism sort of fell out of use to the point where no one, because the ancient Hebrew had no vowels, I believe.
Yes.
Nobody really knew how this word was pronounced, so there are various sort of educated guesses at it, and one of the early ones was Jehovah. I think Yahweh is the more favored interpretation. But yeah, that kind of stuck, so they regard that as God's sort of personal name, because they see God as a sort of you know, as an individual person, if you like.
So what about the other, what should we call them, principles? I don't know, strategies that JWs are famous for. I mean, apart from knocking on your door and trying to give you a watchtower, there's I had an encounter with one of those very recently, and I had no time at all, and I ran downstairs to see who was at the door, and it was two old ladies trying to give me a watchtower, and they said the opening line, of course, "Do you want to know the truth?" or whatever the opening line is, and I said, "Listen, I'm president of Atheism UK and an ex-science teacher. I think I know enough truth. Go away." And actually, I use stronger language than "go away." They went. And anyway, so how did I mean, for example, the famous one is no blood transfusions. How did that come about?
Yeah, that's there. So again, it's a sort of a dubious sort of scriptural interpretation when the Christians sort of decided that they, you know, under St. Paul, decided that they no longer needed to keep the old the Mosaic law. There was just a couple of things that they sort of retained from that, and one of them was you will not take blood into your body. At the time, of course, that meant like consumption of blood as a food. But the Jehovah's Witnesses have sort of extended that to include transfusions. So I think it's kind of a massive gaffe that they made, really, because so many members have subsequently died
Yes.
Over
So it could have been saved. Yes.
Yeah, it could
Yeah.
have easily been saved.
Yeah.
Weirdly, Jehovah's Witnesses kind of deny that, or they did in my day when I was an active member of the organisation. And they will tell you that nobody has ever died from not having a blood transfusion, which is a bit odd.
Not true.
Yeah, it's not true. So that's the sort of origin of it. And I think they kind of, once you've sacrificed so many of your members on the altar of that interpretation, it gets to a point where you can't really retract it then and change your mind about it, because it's would be a case of, well, what about all these people that have died? And then it comes, it becomes a question mark then over their claims to be God's representatives on earth, which is what they claim to be.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, the other one is shunning, isn't it? Now, I had a conversation with somebody else today who I invited to come on the show, not tonight, but in future. And he was very wary because he doesn't want to be shunned, which is understandable. So I said, well, you could come on in the dark and we could use a voice distorter, or you could come on with a mask on, Darth Vader, for example, and we could interview you like that. Especially as those Darth Vader masks do distort your voice, don't they? Very often.
Yeah.
So
I can understand that, because shunning is something very real. Within the Jehovah's Witness cult, I regard it as a cult, so I'll just refer to it as a cult.
Fine. Yes. Yes.
And
if anybody's entitled to call it a cult, it's you.
And oddly, they're a little bit. The Jehovah's Witnesses are a little bit sneaky about shunning these days. They will officially, sort of publicly, using their sort of PR wing, will deny that shunning takes place, but everybody that's actually been a member or is a member knows that's absolute nonsense, and that shunning very much takes place and is very is rigorously enforced.
Did you suffer from it?
To a degree. I had a bit of an odd status because of the way that I left the cult. I for reasons that we may or may not get onto later, I was I basically had a judicial committee appointed to sort of try my case, put me on trial, because I was practicing things that the Jehovah's Witnesses considered to be apostasy, or well, perhaps not apostasy, but not in line with their
does that include horticulture? Was it anything horticultural?
No, it was nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that.
Any mushrooms involved?
I wasn't growing weed or anything like that, no.
Oh, damn.
And which is it's illegal here, so we can't do that. No, I've lost my train of thought now.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so they appointed a judicial committee to try me, to put me on trial. This is how sort of draconian they are. And it got to the point where it was looking like there was no way out. I would either have to renounce my path and beg for forgiveness and throw myself on their mercy, or I would be expelled. And I wasn't prepared, because I no longer believed in their teachings. I wasn't prepared to sort of make any attempt to placate them and stay in the religion. So I said, well, look, there's an alternative here. I can reject you. So I wrote a formal letter, basically resigning my position in the religion. So I was never actually formally what they call disfellowship.
Yes,
that's what they do to people, and then they're shunned. So I had a bit of an odd status. So what I found was some Jehovah's Witnesses shunned me and some didn't. So yeah, it was all very odd.
They
My
sort of didn't know what to do with you.
some would just, to this day, some would just blank me if they saw me in the street. They would just completely ignore me. People I'd grown up with, people that had known me since I was a small child, would just completely ignore me because I no longer believe what they believe.
That's very Christian of them, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So
you went down your own garden path.
yeah.
As
Well,
a
just I
horticultural.
suppose we need to kind of rewind a bit to how I got to that point, I suppose, because I was always a very inquiring mind. I think my mom used to say the first word I ever spoke was why, because I always wanted to know how things worked and why things were the way they were. So I always had a very inquiring mind. So when I got to secondary school, I absolutely loved science and in particular biology. I was sort of learning as much as I could and soaking it up like a sponge. And inevitably, what things I was being taught, things I was learning, came into conflict with the Jehovah's Witness teachings, which were that human origins were consisted of a man and a woman made exactly as the human species is today, 6,000 years ago, in a perfect ecosystem called the Garden of Eden. And what I was discovering was none of that
It's true.
reality, and none of it seemed, none of it was real, and there was this vast abundance of evidence contradicting it.
So you've puzzled me now, because you said 6,000 years ago, the origin. And I would have thought that would have made you a young Earth creationist, but you're actually an old Earth creationist.
Right. Well, here's
what's going on there?
It's the subtle distinction is that what I said was human origins. Not
planet origin.
They believed that the Earth is much older. This is where they diverge from your sort of archetypal young Earth creationists. They believe the Earth could be millions and millions of years old. They're quite happy to accept that, and that there was life on it, perhaps for millions of years. But they can't quite justify saying that, they can't quite stretch to saying that humans have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, because that doesn't tie in with biblical genealogy. So, so although they can accept that nature and the planet have existed for much longer, humanity, they believe, began around about 6,000 years ago.
That's interesting, because it means that, presumably in their minds, God created, the sun and the moon and the stars and the earth, and then sat around for the next, I don't know how many millions of years, doing nothing, twiddling his thumbs, and suddenly thought, we need a few people.
Yeah, they have some weird ideas, and this is where it all kind of breaks down a bit, and there isn't really a complete consensus on what they believe. Sort of, it's a bit of a free for all. Like, some believe that the dinosaurs were created to kind of fertilize the earth and make soil, and
that's interesting.
Sort of get the earth ready for the next stage. And why exactly a sort of omniscient, omnipotent God couldn't have just made a pre-fertilized earth, I'm not quite sure about that.
Dinosaur poop is so much better. I mean,
there's no substitute for the real stuff, is there? Dinosaur poo.
You kind of get into. Sorry, carry on.
No, I was going to say, Dean made a comment about Jehovah's Witnesses not celebrating Halloween, ironically, because they don't like random strangers showing up at their door. I thought that was quite ironic. But
thanks, Dean. We love you, Dean.
I wanted to ask about, not only, as far as I know, and the reason I know this is because when I was still teaching primary school, many years ago, there was a boy in my class who was actually Jehovah's Witness, and he wasn't allowed to. We weren't allowed to celebrate his birthday.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
so that,
Mhm.
and I know Christmas is definitely no.
Yeah.
And
Mm,
many Jehovah's Witnesses are also very fervent pacifists, and
mm.
things like
Um,
national anthems and those types of things are sort of also. Could you just speak to that for a moment?
yeah, sure. A lot of this stuff with not celebrating, holidays and goes back to this idea of like purifying Christianity that goes right back to the founder, Charles Taze Russell. This idea that trying to get back to a more pure form of Christianity that would have been practiced closer to the time of Christ. So obviously, first century Christians wouldn't have celebrated Christmas and Easter, and they believe a lot of these things have sort of accumulated pagan, bits and pieces. They've assimilated pagan bits and pieces, so they're not pure. Um, Birthdays are a bit of an odd one. They don't celebrate birthdays because it's a bit more obscure. Basically, there are no positive depictions of birthday celebrations in the Bible. They're always something which that birthday celebrations in the Bible, like for instance, the birthday of Herod, where John the Baptist sort of met his end and his head was presented on a silver platter. Were kind of opulent, like hedonistic pagan affairs, not the kind of thing a Christian would want anything to do with. So no real
Well,
solid,
well,
no real solid biblical
I
basis
just
for it.
I can say not celebrating birthdays is perhaps not a good idea. I mean, you're just getting older, really.
Yeah. I've had
Maybe
enough
there's some
birthdays.
sense, if you get past a certain age, I can 100% live with. Maybe it seems that I have some affinity with the Jehovah's Witnesses because
Yeah,
I mean,
well, you could do what I do. I do celebrate birthdays now. I think I'm on my 34th birthday.
You started late.
That's the way to do it.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely.
As for the sort of pacifism bit, they're not really pacifists as such, because a lot of them are sort of very keenly looking forward to a time when they'll see everyone that isn't a Jehovah's Witness decomposing after having been struck down by God. Some of them are quite graphic about that and how much they're looking forward to it. So I wouldn't really call that pacifism, but they do believe that they are subjects of God's kingdom, if you like, on earth. So they live and dwell among us, but they're not subjects of sort of our worldly governments and
yeah.
states.
They're not the only religion that won't accept our laws because God's laws are the only ones that are real in their minds.
Well, don't get
That
me
makes
wrong, they're not like sovereign citizens or anything like that. So they do believe it's important to follow the laws of the land. But their ultimate loyalty lies with God's kingdom. So they'll never sing the national anthem or pledge allegiance. They'll never do national service or join the army or anything like that, because that's all considered to be, giving your loyalty to worldly leaders and worldly nations.
Yes.
Benjamin, I want to ask you about marriage and other civil unions in the JWs. I presume they don't accept same-sex relations at all.
No, absolutely not.
But do they do when it comes to weddings and such? Do they have any celebration? And so do they basically adhere to whatever the civil rules are? I've never thought about that. So if you're a young Jehovah's Witness couple, how does that work? Do you sort of actually celebrate a marriage if you're not allowed to celebrate a birthday? Is that was it sort of all very demure?
Well, it's probably like the whole, well, they call it courting, you know, it's all a bit antiquated and like something from another century. But if a boy and a girl like each other in the Jehovah's Witness religion, then if they're in good standing in the congregations, they have to be, you know, considered to be a good upstanding members. You wouldn't want to pursue anyone that wasn't. Then they would kind of make it known that they're interested in courting that person, and then if that person then consents to that, they would maybe have some chaperoned meetings, dates, like very important that never to be alone together, almost like an Islamic courting almost. And then you know they'd sort of go along like that until they eventually decide that they would become officially engaged. They don't really believe in long, very, very long engagements, so they'd be married fairly quickly after that. And the actual wedding would probably be much like any other wedding you've been to. I mean, obviously the ceremony, the religious part, would be in the Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall. And they never miss an opportunity to sort of try and get some new recruits. So if there are sort of family members there and things that aren't in the religion, they'd find themselves subjected to an attempt to recruit them into the religion.
So if I were planning, that's an interesting thing. Last night, my son, who's 21, actually made this announcement that he's thinking about going to church tomorrow. Now, if you know my family, you will know that is a very, very odd thing for my 21-year-old son to say. And I sort of, oh, okay, which church are you going to go to? And he said, well, he was thinking of one of the bigger congregations. And I said, why? And he said, no, he thinks that's a good place to look for a girl, maybe a pretty girl. Maybe church is a good place to find a pretty girl. I said, well, okay. And we actually decided that besides looking for a pretty girl, he has to arrive early so that he can see out of what kind of car the family gets, because that's more important than So he's sort of looking for a Toyota Prado or something like that. So I'll see if he gets up. I'll see if he gets up in time for any church service tomorrow morning.
I think he's probably in for a long time rather than a good time.
I'll give some feedback next week about whether he actually went. But I want to. How
there are Christian dating sites, you know.
Yeah, but then he can just. No, he doesn't want to go to a dating site because, I mean, he can go to any day. He wants to sort of do the checking out in person. There's something about being in person. I wanted to ask about going to the Kingdom Hall. Would I, let's say I'm shopping for a religion, would I be able to go to the Kingdom Hall, and where would I know about where to find them or what time the services are? I've never thought about that, actually. Would I be welcome? Would I? And what would it be like? And secondly,
let's carry on.
No, the second thing I wanted to ask was, is there a lot of sort of I don't want to use it's with reservation that I use the word inbreeding, but I mean, I can imagine that it's a bit that JW is a close community, and that is there a lot of sort of interaction in terms of young people from outside of the JW circles, and was it sort of insular in terms of a community and of finding partners and things like that? How does that work?
Right.
Different races.
You raised some quite interesting points there. So sorry, what was the first part again?
Oh, if I was shopping around for a church,
if you were to, you'd be very welcome. In fact, you'd be what I would call I think they refer to it as love bombing. You know, people that study cults. You'd find
Yes.
that they would all be coming up to you and asking how you are, being really super nice. So, and they're open to the public. So yeah, you could do that. And as long as you weren't disruptive or anything like that, they would definitely welcome you. And then as for the sort of I think probably one of the few there are some redeeming features in the religion. There are some nice bits of it, and they are very anti-racist. You know, I can only speak from my experience. I have heard that in other parts of the world it's not quite the same, but certainly growing up in sort of in the West Midlands and in the sort of 1990s, 1980s, in a Jehovah's Witness community, there was no racism. Um, they do have quite a high member turnover, well, they used to. So you will get some multi-generational families, but not that many. So you'll get a lot of people who are relatively new recruits. So although they are an insular community, that would kind of negate they are actively recruiting. So that would negate any problems with like inbreeding. So you and the absence and the sort of frowning on any kind of racial discrimination would mean that you could have a partner from anywhere if you were considered to be a good spiritual match. So yeah,
Well,
so there wouldn't.
I do know that in South Africa, a large percentage of Christians are Black Jehovah's Witnesses. That they're a very fast-growing community in the Black population of South Africa. So there's a rich it's a rich missionary field in South Africa.
I'd be really interested to know how you know, do those communities mix with white communities, or you know, how does it work?
Well, South Africa is, although we completely integrated, geographically there's still not as much integration as many people would like to see in terms of just where people live, because that's historical legacy. But I definitely think that it'd be completely integrated. I don't think there'd be much racism, even regarding even in a country like South Africa. So yeah, I think, but there's many. It's a growing sect amongst the Black African population.
I don't think they have many parts of the planet where they are growing these days, from what I hear. I don't have a lot to do. I don't keep up a lot with what's going on in the religion now. I feel like I've kind of been through a process, and I've
fully escaped. Yes.
Yeah, I've kind of been through the process. I've let go of. I did have a lot of anger and bitterness about things in the early days, but I feel like I've moved past that, and the kind of there is a big ex-Jehovah's Witness community, but I don't really have a lot to do with that because it's not really that relevant to me in my life anymore.
What about your family, Benjamin? Do you have contact with your family, your parents, sisters, brothers, siblings? What's the situation?
Well, I'm from quite a big family. I have 5 siblings, and out of those siblings, only one is still in the religion. I always said I would never do anything like this, like I'm doing now. Or I've had quite a few people say to me, "Oh, you should write an autobiography. You know, you've had a really interesting life." I've always shied away from telling my story or doing anything like that publicly. I always said I wouldn't do that out of deference and respect for my parents while they were still alive. We lost my dad back in the summer. My mom, unfortunately, has suffered quite a severe cognitive decline and isn't really very aware of really what's happening. So I feel like I'm free to kind of speak out now without causing them any pain.
Yes.
So yeah, as I say, only one of my siblings has stayed in the religion. I think an awful lot of my, this is what I meant when I said it's got quite a high turnover. I think most of my contemporaries have left as well, or at least half of them. And that's quite useful to the Jehovah's Witness upper echelons, because it means they can gloss over and they can whitewash history and change things without anybody being aware of it.
And they've got a justification for all the missionary work that needs to be done too.
So I don't know what's going on. I hear lately they've stopped. I noticed someone in the chats was asking about logging, whether they have to log their hours. Well, that very recently, I hear they've stopped doing that. So an ordinary member no longer has to sort of log and record and report back on the hours that they spend doing preaching, which is a big thing, huge thing, really. So I don't know what's behind all that. The skeptic might say that they're going into a decline and they're trying to hide that. Maybe.
Do you know if numbers are going down or what?
I think they're pretty stagnant in the West.
Yeah.
In most of the Western world, from what I hear, they're pretty stagnant. But as I say,
it might be really difficult to know, because I've heard that people might leave, but they still kept on the books, so to speak, and therefore
you're right. Because you'll get people who, that, like in the ex-Jehovah's Witness community, they've got these terms like PIMO, physically in, mind out, and things like that, because there's a lot of people who a lot of their family are Jehovah's Witnesses, their social circle is all Jehovah's Witnesses, because you're discouraged from having any friends or building any friendships outside the religion. So their entire world really is inside that community. So even though you may have come to a point where you're thinking this is all bullshit, I don't believe this anymore, you may well just
maintain the pretense.
Keep up appearances, maybe pop into the Kingdom Hall now and again, because you don't want to end up being shunned and losing everything.
So what about the afterlife, Ben? Is there such a thing? And what about, is this the religion that's supposed to, you all end up with your own planet? Is that JW?
You're getting mixed up with the Mormons.
Am I? Oh, right. Okay. Yes.
Mormons.
And there's the other thing where you can actually sanctify. That's not the right word, is it? You can make a saint out of dead people. Is that Mormons as well, or is that
Mormons
is it?
Well.
John, you've got your sects all crossed here. I mean, no, the Jehovah's Witnesses aren't that, I don't know, it's good or bad.
I mean, Mormons believe some pretty batshit crazy things, but Jehovah's Witnesses have got their own batshit crazy stuff, and a lot of it you wouldn't necessarily know about unless you had been a long-term sort of member, because they don't tell you this stuff. They don't tell you the more crazy things when you first sort of get interested and start doing what they call studying. When Jehovah's Witnesses come around to your house and teach you about their beliefs, and it's all the nice stuff at first.
What I know, Ben, you can correct me again, but the Jehovah's Witnesses in my mind is forever associated with 144,000. So the 144,000, that's the number that will join God and Jesus in heaven, and the rest, even people of faith who are not amongst the 144,000 will just fortunately not go to hell, but be just annihilated. That's the way I understand it. And then heaven is this place. I remember growing up with these, occasionally setting eyes on these little Watchtower books, and I used to love the pictures because they were so bright and colorful. And you see the little girl with the who had to wear polio braces, and then she's running and the braces are sort of flying. I think that's where Forrest Gump got the that vision came from. And the lion lying with the lamb. Is that the right? Am I
Yeah,
sort of
this
on
is
the
all the
right?
nice. This is all the nice stuff, you know, that they teach you. You know, that they hook you in with all this. You know, all the ailments and illnesses will all be cured, and nothing nasty it will ever happen. And the lion will lie down with the lamb. There'll be no predators. I'm not quite sure how ecosystems will work, but you know, just I suppose.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to your current mission, which is to teach creationism to teach evolution to creationists. How did that come about? And what do you think is they've got some misconceptions, haven't they? I mean, I'm in the same business. I also try to teach creationist evolution on social media. So we are. This is how we met. I think we're in agreement here. But what started you doing this, and what particular misconceptions? Because I've got my idea of their ideas, but what particular misconceptions do you think they suffer from?
Okay. Well, how did I get into it? I suppose because it was a bit of a passion, because it was the first thing that, or one of the first things that sort of got me questioning what I'd always been taught. And I remember saying to the judicial committee that was trying me, you know, trying my case, I said to them, look, you've always taught me that, you know, everything was all made, you know, all the species were made together. And, you know, you had this perfect ecosystem, the Garden of Eden, everything appeared all at once. And then humanity was like the crowning achievement that was placed in there. I said, but when I look at the facts, that's not what actually happened. You've got a succession of epochs where different species have sort of risen to be the dominant species on the planet, and then you've had an extinction event, and it's all started again. New species have evolved, and they've occupied the same biological niches. I said, what you have taught me doesn't correspond with the evidence. So what's your answer to that? And all they could say was, well, we don't have an answer. You just have to have faith. So that wasn't sufficient. You know, that wasn't sufficient for me. And it was starting to look more and more like I had been sold a load of nonsense. So it was interesting. I had friends in secondary school, one of whom was a staunch atheist, and we used to have some massive debates, and I'd be on the sort of Christian creationist side, and then we had a Muslim friend, and he would argue from that sort of side of things. And we used to have some massive, huge debates would blow up. But I kind of knew he was right, really. And I was just trying to rationalize that away. And there comes a point where you can't do that anymore, and you know, there's only so much of reality you can push away and rationalize away, isn't there? And you get to a point where you're like, well, I can't do it anymore. You know, evolution is real. The evidence behind it is overwhelming, and it doesn't do you or anybody else any good to try and rail against that. In fact, it's very damaging. It's very psychologically damaging to people. I believe so. I think in debating with creationists and trying to help them to understand that evolution is a reality, I think it is doing a kindness to them ultimately, although it will cause them will cause them some discomfort and some cognitive dissonance. I think if they can break free from that, if they have the capacity to do it, then I think it does.
I want to ask. I want to ask you. The religion that I came from, I would have been firmly on the side of what would, I suppose, be called a creationist or a evolutionary creationist, if that makes any sense, where I was perfectly comfortable with the idea that God created using evolution. Do you make any distinction in trying to convince people, or would you? Now I don't see any distinction between accepting the theory of evolution, but if you're a creationist, you're a creationist, and none of that makes any sense to me now. But would you engage with somebody who says, "Oh yes, I accept the theory of evolution, but I still accept that God created"? Would you go into that debate, or would you sort of only engage? How would you view that?
Okay, so I think what you're describing is what we call theistic evolutionists, which
That's right.
they're quite a large group, really. The entire Catholic Church, technically, doctrinally, is theistic evolutionists.
Yes.
The problem with theistic evolution, I mean, I got to a point where I realized that if I wanted to sort of to build a sort of realistic, picture of how things really were, that I would have to just ditch all my preconceptions. So everything that I thought I knew all went in the bin, and I just started again from scratch. So is there a God? I never found any good reasons to believe in that there is a God or some kind of being. I never found any good reasons, so I can't disprove it. And it's the same with theistic evolution. The problem with theistic evolution is that it's a non-falsifiable premise. Did God tinker with the natural process of evolution? And all I can say to that is, do we have any good reasons to believe that he might have done? And I don't think there are any. If you want to believe in God and you want to practice a religion and you want to reconcile that with the reality of evolution, then theistic evolution is probably the route you want to go down. But for me, it was a case
for your own comfort, really.
Yeah, for me, it was a case of there's no reason to believe. I can't find anything that points to any tinkering, or it just, to me, it's the process of evolution is indistinguishable from a process which occurred completely naturally without any divine intervention. So how do you know, or how can you tell?
There's Occam's razor. There's no need to invoke an agent where there's no evidence for one unnecessary.
Exactly.
So I want to introduce a little clip of a video here, because what you're doing, you said it's that you are trying to save them from a delusion, and that is actually a kind act. But this video I want to show, I forget the name of this lovely lady, but she counsels people now. She's a new atheist herself, but she tries not to bring, counseling is listening rather than speaking. So she tries to keep her views out of the experience. But she met this elderly lady who's only just realized that in her entire life she's been wrong. Watch this.
This is still a little bit raw, but I just got off with a client who's recovering from religion. And usually in a client, it's not about me at all. It's not about my feelings, my story, any of that. I'm totally focused on the other person. But today I wept with her. And looking back, it may have been appropriate in the moment. It may not have been. It may have been a little bit too much of me showing up in the session. But it's because she's not on here on TikTok at 20 years old. deconstructing patriarchy with her best friends. She's 60 with 8 kids and realizing now for the first time that she was sold a lie. She was told that the only value she has would be in the service that she gives to others, especially her husband and her children. And what kills me is that by the time that she knew that she had value and she had a voice and she deserves to have passions and opinions and she deserves to have autonomy over her own body, her life was mostly over. So when people tell me, why don't you leave religion alone? They aren't hurting anyone. People miss what I think is the greatest tragedy of all. To me, the greatest tragedy is being on your deathbed and realizing that you never lived, that you had one chance to experience existence against all odds, one chance to sit and marvel at being alive and play and discover who you are and what you like and feel what vulnerable, naked love feels like, and you missed it because you were fighting for your worthiness in order to be worthy of the next life. And then you realize too late that that life isn't going to come because you realize now it's an illusion and a fairy tale. It took this woman's life, and now she's sitting here realizing that she didn't even get the chance to grow up, and that in many ways she's still a 6-year-old girl because that's when she first learned how to repress herself. And then the weight of being mom still to 8 children because she genuinely loves them. She feels like religion stole from her the only thing that has irreplaceable value in this world, and that's time. So no, I'm not going to shut up because it's people who asked me hard questions and people who pushed up against the idea of faith as a virtue that got me out of Mormonism and got me into my own bodily autonomy, my own voice, my own passions, my own direction, and my own relationships. So when people say to you, why can't you leave religion alone? It's because of people like this woman who have to grieve something unbelievably painful, that they are towards the end of their life and they never got to live.
How powerful is that?
And
Yeah, very powerful.
I would like to just that's so powerful. And in the last 3 minutes that we have, if anybody asks me about why I would take on even theistic creationists, which I think should be taken on more than even the young earth creationists, because they are more insidiously dangerous. My reason would be that it's one thing to focus on the biological aspects and the science aspects. My focus as a former devout believer is on the fact that even if you're a believer in theistic evolution, which means you accept all the science 100%, and people would say, why should you argue with anybody who accepts all the science and just believes that there's a tinkerer? The fact, hello, Woofy. The fact of the matter is that by postulating a creator, whether he creates through evolution or sculpts humans out of mud, there's the postulate, the premise that there's sin. Because without the creator, there's no Adam and Eve. And without Adam and Eve, there's no fall from grace. And without the fall from grace, there's no need for Jesus Christ and the blood sacrifice. And that is my reason for speaking out and educating people that even theistic creationism is wrong in so many ways because of the implications in how people are then taught to live their lives. And that's just what I would like to end on. And please continue doing what you're doing, Benjamin.
Yeah.
And let those little plants grow. And that'll be me
Keep
for
up
now.
the good
John.
work. Yeah, keep up the good work. And that is Benjamin's eBay name. So if you want to buy anything from him, you go to We're Incandescent. There you go.
And also, I just wanted to say I had a thought. If anybody wanted to reach out, if anyone's had a similar experience to me, and they wanted to reach out, then perhaps we can put some contact details in the description or something. My email or something like that. I'm happy
Definitely.
to
We can do that. Thank you. That's a very kind offer. Yeah.
Um,
So thank you very much, Ben. You've been fantastic. Thank you, Tercia. As usual, you've been fantastic.
We've got the World Cup. We've got the World Cup. Nothing else
Yes,
matters. I just want to say.
yes, I know. Rugby. Yes, I know. So I hope to see you tomorrow, Tercia, because we will have another Views on the News where you get to express your opinions again. And I don't know whether Benjamin might be interested in joining our panel one day, because what we do is I have a Global Atheist News show, which just went out before this one, in fact. And then on the following day, I have a panel of people, because the news is supposed to be unbiased. But then on the following day, I have a panel of biased people who shred the news that we reported the day before. So that's an available opportunity for you if you want to get in touch with me and join that panel. And thank you very much, viewers, particularly Dean. We love your comments, Dean. Next week, we're going to have another interesting guest. We don't know who it is yet, but there will be one. So, wave goodbye, people. Thank you.